Good evening, rational-minded people across the planet. This is AVFM News and Activism. I'm Paul Elam with co-host James Huff, and we are going to do an interview tonight after we do a bit of news. We're going to bring on Michael Volpe in just a moment, who has written a book about the Chris Mackney case, and it is a gut-wrenching story. So we're going to try to clown around a little bit during the news because it's hard to imagine clowning around talking about what happened with Chris Mackney. Michael, you might want to go ahead and shut your camera off, your video camera. It should be somewhere on your screen controls. Ah, look, the panicked look has been replaced by the handsome picture. We like it. Okay, so I'm also, as I said, I'm with AVFM News and Activism and AVFM Radio producer James Huff. How you doing, James?
I feel great today. How are you, Paul?
I couldn't be better. If I was, I couldn't stand myself. Well, I already can't stand myself, so I guess I probably really can't be better. So what do we got? We got some news to start with before.
Yeah, we sure do. I've got two short stories here. We're gonna go ahead and take one that just went up on AVFM underneath their news section. The first male-only shelter in the state opening in Dallas next year. This is coming out of CBS Dallas-Fort Worth. The Family Place announced plans Wednesday for the very first dedicated men's domestic violence shelter in the state of Texas. To meet the increasing community demand for emergency shelter services for male victims and their children, the Family Place deemed this shelter the necessary next step in its expansion of services. The Family Place has spent an average of $20,000 per month this year in hotel costs for sheltering male victims and their children. 19 male clients as of September 2015, double the total of 2014. Even with security, transportation, and programming restrictions, hotels were the only option available to not only keep female and male clients separate, but also ensure that these men were not turned away when they asked for help. This increase in male victims coming forward is said to be largely due to the Dallas Police Department Lethality Assessment Program and Dallas Mayor Mike Rawlings' efforts to increase awareness. The Family Place will specifically develop staff and programming for the men's shelters to meet the unique requirements of this demographic, including shelter and counseling services for these men and their children. The majority of the funding for the shelter will come from a New Victims of Crime Act grant, but the Family Place must also raise additional funds from the community. Quote, a report being released by Dallas Mayor Mike Rawlings tonight shows the incredible demand for shelter space and other services for victims of domestic violence, says Paige Fink, Chief Executive Officer of the Family Place. At the Family Place, we are committed to meeting the need to the best of our ability as long as the financial support from the community is there. We cannot do it without their help. The Family Place plans to open its new men's shelter in January 2016. Efforts to find the location are ongoing, as it is important to find the space that best serves this population of victims. The Family Place welcomes recommendations and assistance from the community as it continues its search. The project will develop concurrently with the Family Place Legacy Capital campaign that will include 30 to 36 beds to serve as an overflow emergency shelter when the shelter at the Family Place Safe Campus is full. All right, folks, this is first in the state of Texas, one of few in the country, United States-wise. Yeah.
Good deal. I mean, I want to say, kudos to the Family Place, but we do need a little bit of history that hasn't been shown up about this case. And
I would.
Story. I did this, folks. This is the first time I heard this story. Was right now when James read it. The Family Place, by the way, I don't know how many of you recall the Dallas area rapid transit sort of mini scandal of the poster programs that they were putting up on trains that showed a young boy, a picture of a 10-year-old boy, and underneath it the caption said, "When I grow up, I'll kill my wife." And a picture of a young girl, 9, 10 years old, saying, "When I grow up, my husband will beat me to death." These were placed all over Dallas area rapid transit trains by the family place.
Yep.
NCFM and AVFM did contact them and protested this very, very, I think, psychologically unsound presentation to the public, and of course a distorted view of the nature of family abuse, being it that it painted it as all female victims and all male perpetrators. That was followed sometime later by a rally that the mayor had. I think it was about a year later, that involved Troy Aikman, and I wrote a rather scathing review of that. But we have been pressuring officials in Dallas and put pressure on the family place going back 2.5 years. And I got to tell you right now, James, I think we might have had an impact.
I hope we've had an impact. I hope that the services that they provide for these men are actually making a difference, and not just some kind of here's a bed, go take an anger management course. I think we talked a little bit about that before the show.
Yeah, that is always a concern. I know as a clinician that for years in trying to seek some sort of services, aftercare services for people that were in residential treatment, when the victim was male, I many times was offered I had women's services, particularly, and I'm going to say this out loud, that WIRES, the Women's Information Referral and Exchange Service in Houston, telling me that, well, we got anger management courses if he wants to come take those. And I was in the position once of having to say, well, can we do this before or after he gets the stitches removed from his head?
Yep.
By the way, they weren't placed there by him. I think this also boils down to, as revealed in the story, that it's a matter of finances. The domestic violence industry has worked overtime for years to try to deny the existence of male victims. Then they were pressured after men's organizations started speaking up to issuing hotel vouchers for men to go to because they wanted to keep them separate from the women. I understand that in a setting like that with people in fractured relationships, possibly mixing men and women together is not the best idea in the world. But they found out when they started doing that the word got around, and the guys that were getting abused started coming for services, and the next thing you know, it was cheaper to have a shelter, sort of contrary to their whole idea in the first place that men were not victims.
Imagine that.
So it's going to be kind of hard, at least at the family place in Dallas, to continue to tell people that there's no male victims when you're housing them. And I think that's a good thing. This is how we change the narrative.
Yeah, that almost sounds like the free market at work there.
Sounds like the free market. It also sounds like a little bit of truth had to sneak into the equation.
Yep.
And that's not a bad thing. But anyway, they may be learning their lesson. I'll assume, as naive as I am, that they have learned their lesson until I'm proven otherwise. They are building the shelter. It is going to be open early next year. So kudos to the family place for doing the right thing, even if it happened to be financially convenient.
Here we go. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next story here.
Okay.
If you have not been paying attention or following the case that I am about to talk about, then you guys need to hold on to your hats. All right? And try to keep your immediate temper under control so you don't break the screen and miss the rest of the show. Case of babysitter having sex with boy 11 will be sent to Court of Appeal by Attorney General. This is coming out of the UK, by the way. Excuse me a second. The The highest judges in the country are set to review a controversial ruling in the case of babysitter Jade Hatt, who was spared prison after having sex with her 11-year-old charge. Hatt, 21 years old, was given a suspended sentence following the 45-second encounter at the boys' home last November, and later explained her actions by claiming she fell in love too easily. The apparently lenient sentence was later slammed by victims' charities, including the NSPCC, and was reviewed by the Attorney General after a petition launched online gathered more than 3,000 signatures. The mother of the victim, who cannot be named for legal reasons, said she had received a call from Attorney General Jeremy Wright personally this afternoon to inform her the decision had been taken to send the case to the Court of Appeal. And she says, "The wonderful news is the Attorney General has decided to go for appeal. He rang me to give me the news, and that has left me very tearful and emotional again. Hopefully we should get a date within the next 6 weeks for it to go in front of the 3 highest judges in the country. It will then be down to them to decide whether it was an unduly lenient sentence. The whole thing has quietened down since the case, but I know there is still a huge amount of support from the petition that was set up, and that must have helped in getting the case appealed. I'm still very upset about what happened, but I'm going through all the normal motions. The support I've had is absolutely fantastic, and I just want to thank all the people of Swindon for being behind me." Now, the mother had previously criticized her former partner for helping Hatt escape with a light touch by playing down the effect on their son. Rob Ross, the former partner, defending Hatt at the sentencing, read a statement from the victim's father to the court. Oh, I'm sorry, Rob Ross must have been the attorney. "He is sex mad," it said. "He would have been fully up for this experience, and in many ways sees it as a notch in his belt and is totally unaffected by it." Yeah, hold on, there's more.
I was afraid you were going to say that.
Hatt was given a 6-month jail term, suspended for 2 years, with supervision, and told to register as a sex offender for 7 years. And Judge Tim Mousley also imposed a sexual harm prevention order banning her from having unsupervised contact with young boys for 2 years. "Having read everything before me, it was quite clear he was a mature 11-year-old and you were an immature 20-year-old, so that narrows down the arithmetic age gap between you," the judge told her. "I have read the comments of the boy's father to the police where he doesn't consider you a typical 20-year-old. I have also read what he has said about the effect on the victim." A spokesman for the Attorney General said, "After careful consideration, the Attorney General Jeremy Wright, QCMP, has asked the Court of Appeal to consider the sentence of Jade Hatt under the unduly lenient sentence scheme. It will now be up to 3 Court of Appeal judges to decide whether they consider it to be unduly lenient and whether or not to increase it." The boy's own father said that shit about his 11-year-old boy. And then this fucked up judge actually had the gall to say he was a mature 11-year-old and you were an immature 20-year-old, so that narrows down the arithmetic age gap. Really? Last time I checked, the law was not fucking subjective when it came to age of consent. Have you ever heard of that? You ever heard of that, Paul? Ever heard of a subjective age?
No, actually, I mean, your problem there was that you read the law. And in cases like this, the law doesn't have anything to do with it so much as the sympathies for a young woman who made it.
Falls in love too easily.
She falls in love too easily. But I got to tell you, I'm not going to jump on the father with both feet. I mean, what he did was, I mean, on the surface, absolutely appalling.
Other reports are saying that the father had been fucking around with this woman.
Well, I wondered about that. I also wonder if the father might have had some denial. I know that when I've dealt with many parents whose children suffered some kind of abuse from outside the family, parents that weren't abusive, and I don't know anything about this father. I know that he made a really ridiculous statement to say that or to take even if the boy was acting like it was a notch in his belt. There's stuff that's going on underneath that when those kind of boundaries are crossed. But I do know that it's very typical for parents to want to believe that their children are all right. And I don't know that that was the case here. We'll never know. A lot of this stuff, we won't know if the father was having sex with the babysitter, or if he wanted to have sex with the babysitter, or if he worked out a deal with the babysitter to have sex in exchange for putting his son on the altar. I mean, there is a number of scenarios that could have happened here. But what I do know more than anything else is that if there's what I would call a sense of criminal negligence here, it's in the judge. The judge is not supposed to take the father's word for any of this stuff. The judge is not supposed to take emotional assessments from the parent of the victim and then determine that that should affect sentencing. That should have been something out of a report by the court. And what the judge essentially did, according to this story anyway, is that he took the word of the victim's father over the boy being okay, and there was no need to make a big deal about this. That's the criminal act here that I can put my finger on. Anything else in this? I mean, it's another story. You know, if we look at it on the superficial superficial level, here's a story of a woman who molested a kid, and like Lena Dunham, she just walks away and maybe goes on to fame and fortune, or maybe goes on to have sex with her victim's father. I don't know. But the judge here, man, this guy ought to step down. If he's got no more sense than to take the testimony, the unprofessional, unexpertised testimony of the victim's father and apply it to sentencing in the case as though he were some sort of forensic psychologist that came in there and gave an assessment of what was going on, is negligence on the bench on the worst level. I mean, maybe nearly as bad as what we're going to be talking about here with the Chris Mackney case. But it's hard to know where to go, except the judge has the responsibility. At that point, the perpetrator was the woman, victim was the child. The father has a right to maybe give impact testimony, but he doesn't have a right to hand over an assessment to the court and have it taken into consideration in sentencing, particularly regarding his assessment of the emotional maturity of his victim son's attacker. Man, easy to get your blood boiling over this, but I'm afraid there's nowhere to go with it except, you know, I hope one of these days the judge finds out the hard way through losing his job that this is a big no-no.
I agree. Well, that's all I've got. I know you had some news that you wanted to put out, Paul.
Yes, I do. First, I want to say go Cassie J. $135,000 plus in financing with a $97,000 goal. Her film, The Red Pill, which by every bit of looks of the trailer to it, the 8-minute extended trailer, is actually going to take an objective look at the men's movement, which, I mean, everybody just hold on to your hats for that. If you haven't seen it, you can go to avoiceformen.com, look anywhere on the front page for the words Cassie J or The Red Pill, and you're going to find a link to that trailer and to the Kickstarter, which I still encourage you to give to. I know from talking with her, from getting to know her mother and stepfather and her boyfriend, and seeing what's going on in her life in the 2.5 years that she's been doing this film, that the moment that she let it be known that she wanted to do an objective documentary about the men's movement, that she wanted just to let the camera tell the story, all of her feminist friends turned on her, stuck knives in her back. Doors were closed financially. She went to the feminist film community to have this financed because she thought it was the right thing to do. They shut all that out on her, and now they're furious. Some guy, David something or another, that has a blog called I'm a Mammoth or something like that, wrote up an article where he was terribly offended at what she was doing, and the Social Justice Brigade is out for blood now. But it appears that Cassie J is sticking by her values and is going to try to make this an Oscar-worthy film. She's already an award-winning director, and for her previous efforts, and so we can only hope that it works out well for her. I think she wants to soup this thing up real good with the extra magnificent graphics and animations throughout the movie. The additional money that's coming in, I'm sure, will be used for that. She's in getting to know her, she's quite a perfectionist. But I just want to say congratulations to her and encourage people. If you don't find the link, just Google the Red Pill Movie Kickstarter, and the first link you get back will be to that Kickstarter where you will see the preview. And if you've ever wondered when anybody was going to start allowing the men's movement to say who they were and what they believed in without twisting it a la Adam Serwer or Jeff Charlotte or Mariah Blake or any of that other troupe of yellow journalists, go look at that and see if you're not impressed. The other thing, AVFM launched a new website last night, neonatalcutting.com. I put an announcement up, and in it I said in the beginning, and this is something I feel like, James, I feel like I should have said it 6 years ago. How can we talk about men's rights, honestly, about men's rights and men's issues and boys' issues and boys' rights, if we're not including the right to be free of the knife when they enter the world? If we're not including the right to escape a tremendously painful procedure that we now know through all the scientific research, and if you want to see scientific research, go to neonatalcutting.org. Sorry, I think I said com earlier. It's a .org. Find the research tab at the top of the page and go in and look at the research. This is a damaging procedure. It removes 20,000 nerve endings of erogenous tissue. Most people don't know it, and I'm ashamed to admit it was just a few years ago that I finally got educated enough on this to know that the male foreskin is an organ. It's not just a flap of skin. It's an actual organ. It has a purpose of keeping the glands moist and in their normal condition. In a circumcised penis, a mutilated penis, it dries up, it gets rough, it gets callousy, it loses sensitivity. The research studies out there now say that the average male who undergoes neonatal cutting will lose 75% of his sexual sensitivity from the procedure. Now, I know that there's a lot of guys out there who say, well, I was circumcised and I was okay. And to that,
I wouldn't know any better.
Well, I was going to say to that, a bird that has lived in a cage for 10 years doesn't know it's not free either. Just because you feel okay in the state you're in doesn't mean that you know what it's like to be in the natural, original, intended condition that you were born with. Add to that the fact that your male son is more likely to die from complications of circumcision than he is from SIDS. The research is all in on this. This is a bad practice, just like it's a horrific practice when they do it to women. But as much as I don't like Ann Coulter, I'll quit her. I will quote her here. Female genital mutilation was illegal 20 minutes after we found out it existed. We rushed to it, and I think for good reason. And yet now we have medical clinics, pediatricians' offices are not only getting paid to mutilate these baby boys, they're selling the foreskins off to make facial cream for Oprah fans. This is a real abomination, and it's time that AVFM dedicated a lot of energy to it. I know there is. I've already encountered, I put stuff up on the Facebook page last night, and I've already encountered several people who were just outraged that we were going to actually treat this as though it were a thing. These were not people who were well versed in the subject. I've been finally getting around to studying this for quite some time, and I have come to the inescapable conclusion that circumcision is a euphemism for mutilation. That there is in fact no such thing as a botched circumcision, because what does a botched mutilation mean? It's
more mutilation.
Yes, more mutilation is what it is. So anyway, we've launched that, and within 24 hours, I'm not going to drop a name here, but I was contacted by the executive director of probably the most influential anti-circumcision group maybe in the world, and I'm expecting a meeting Sunday. The other part of this is that I want people to know that this is not just going to be an information portal. I'm going to take about 2 or 3 minutes here to explain how this works, and then we're going to move on to talk to Mr. Volpe. What AVFM has accomplished in the past several years is at least one thing really good, and that is reach on Google. We are able to, if we print an article, it's going to rise to a very high spot in the Google returns, unless you have, I mean, if your name is John Smith, then no, you'll probably never see the AVFM article on John Smith. But if you have any less common sounding name, and we write an article on you, people that are Googling you are going to see it. So here's what we're going to do in the future. We have a case recently, just a week and a half ago, of a doctor that killed a baby with a circumcision in Canada. We are going to place him on a directory at neonatalcutting.com. We're going to put the story of this child's death up, his name in the headline, and he will be placed on the directory, and for the rest of his practicing years, because apparently the Canadian College of Medicine has nothing to say about this. Nobody up there has anything to say about this, except there have been expressed sympathies for the doctor who did it. We have another one who I have a video of, who went on record as saying pretty much the only reason he did circumcisions was for the money. And he runs like a factory type operation, one after another all day long, selling the foreskins, making a ton of money, and more or less bragging about the fact that he mutilated children for $1, and that hinting that he knew it wasn't a medical necessity, that he knew it wasn't even medically beneficial. But hey, the parents wanted it. There's good money in it, so I'm going to do it. I've seen a website where the doctor has scripture from right here in Houston. The doctor has scripture on the front page of his website, and I'm not saying that the doctor doesn't have a right to be a believer. That's certainly within his right. But it would seem to me a little bit more ethical if you were presenting medical necessity instead of God's word on the front page of your website if you're trying to sell a service. These people and a lot more, we're going to have a parade of them. We're going to create a virtual perp walk for these practitioners that are mutilating children, and for the rest of their practices, they are going to be noticed by people who are seeking out their services. We're going to make sure that they get noticed by people that are seeking out their services. We will also expect legal threats. we've been threatened before. Matter of fact, we got a legal threat from Dina Mackney. And of course, anybody that reads AVFM knows that we posted that with basically our two-word response. We practice freedom of speech and freedom of the press at AVFM, and we're going to continue to do this. And this is going to be our contribution to trying to end this horrific, barbaric practice that's happening to our children. And with that, I'm going to end my little rant about the new website. I want to encourage you to visit. And yes, I'm going to encourage you because this is a lot of work to do this. There's a donate button there. If you believe that the mutilation of children should stop, please visit Neonatal Cutting. That's neonatalcutting.org. Check around the site, look about what we're up to, read the article in AVFM about it that's up there now, and if it suits you, please find the donate button and help us do this work. With that, our guest tonight is Michael Volpe, author of Bullied to Death. And this is the Chris Mackney story, and it turns out that the Chris Mackney story is not just as simple as a corrupt family court, money being passed around, although all this is true, and resulting in a man's suicide who just could not take the pressure and he could not take the pain of not being a father and not being allowed to be a father. And Michael has written on this in his book. And with that, I will welcome you, Michael Volpe, to the show. How are you doing tonight, sir?
Doing great. Thank you for having me. Do you want me to just get into the story?
Yeah, why don't you do that? We just recently ran the first chapter of your story.
It's actually chapter 5.
I'm sorry. God forbid I screwed up. Yes, chapter 5.
The book was, I guess it's an homage to Quentin Tarantino in that it was done out of time order. So started the book at his death, then ran the book till after his death, and then you get back. It's all out of time order. So. I guess the story starts on December 29, 2013, when Chris got into his car, drove to East Potomac Park, which is a famous park in Washington, D.C., put a rifle underneath his chin and blew his head off, and literally blew his head off. He was identified by fingerprints. And he committed suicide after a nearly 6-year custody battle that saw him homeless, jobless, no access to his kids, no money. Basically, everything was taken away from him, and the reason for that is largely because he discovered a dark family secret. So the story chronologically starts in July of 1968 in McAllen, Texas, which, if that town sounds familiar, it's where all of the what they call unaccompanied minors, the illegal aliens, the children, that's where most of them are crossing now. It's a very lawless, very corrupt area, and a guy named Sam DeJalia Jr. was down in the area. He was a grain dealer, and what he didn't know was that his business partner had hired a hitman, a guy named Charles Harrelson, who is the father of Woody Harrelson, the actor now. He was still then, but at the time the guy was an actor. And he had hired him to kill Sam, and he hired him to kill Sam because Scamardo was low on money, and they had an insurance policy on each other, so he thought he'd collect on the insurance money. And the hit happened, but the murder was done in a Keystone Cops sort of a way, so everyone got caught. However, somehow this man who had no money hired Percy Foreman, who's a legendary attorney, one of the greatest litigators of all time. And even though he was convicted, he got 7 years probation. So this guy Scamardo moves from Texas, couldn't live in that area anymore, moved from Texas, moved out to Virginia, became a real estate mogul. He's worth somewhere between $50 and $100 million. And about 30-some years after the murder, his daughter Dina, at the time Dina Scamardo, met Chris Mackney in New York. They fell in love, I guess, and they eventually got married. They got married in 2000. The marriage was rocky from the beginning. I describe an anecdote on their honeymoon. Suffice to say, in 2007, the marriage is disintegrating. And what everyone needs to understand is, at this point, even though he'd known Dina for nearly 10 years, he didn't know that her father was a murderer. This is a fact hidden from him by the family. So As the divorce unfolds, Dina hires the top law firm in the area, a firm called Ain & Bank. And the divorce hasn't even technically started, though they were going to get divorced. So they're still living together. So she, her lawyers, applied what I refer to as the silver bullet technique. Sometimes it's referred to as the nuclear option. And that's basically when you use a restraining order for leverage in the divorce. And in this case, she wanted him out of the house. So what she did was she claimed that she was afraid of him. And, you know, in the chapter I described the exact verbiage. But basically, we had a fight. I'm scared. Chris needs to leave the house. And in a subsequent chapter, I describe how easy this is to do. But basically, within 13 days of her applying for the order, there's another order removing him from the house. Soon after he's removed from the house, by accident, he discovers the murder. And the day after he discovered the murder, they fired Ain & Bank, even though they're well-respected, the top firm. And they hired a guy named Jim Cottrell. And the reason they hired this guy, I believe, is Cottrell is very similar to this guy, Percy Foreman. And Cottrell advertises, I'm not the type to settle. And that's exactly what he did. Cottrell's main job in the beginning was to bleed Chris dry of funds. Chris had some money at this point, and he basically did everything he could to not settle until Chris ran out of money. And so I think it was sometime early in 2009, Chris runs out of money. So from that point, except for a few months, he represented himself. And that's basically the equivalent of the New England Patriots playing a high school team. That's what was happening at the time. He was representing himself, Cottrell. So after he's out of money, the next step was to reduce and eliminate Chris's access to his children. So at that point, you enter a guy named Dr. Stanton Samuel, who I think this is in the portion of the book. He's sort of a cult figure because he was referenced in the second to last episode of The Sopranos. He was brought in to do something called a psychological evaluation. He, in a completely illegal manner, did a custody evaluation. I described the difference. The thing people need to understand is there's a difference, and he was supposed to do one, he did the other, and it was a hatchet job. I spend an entire chapter subsequent in the book on how it's a hatchet job. I described Samuel. The worst thing that he said was that Chris Mackney had no friends, and the reason this is horrible is he actually interviewed two of Chris's good friends, a guy named Rich Ware and a guy named Mike Harrison. The other thing you need to know about these two guys, they knew Chris since college. So he interviews not only two of his friends, but two friends who had known him for more than half his life, and then has the audacity to say he has no friends. So he basically blames Chris for everything and says he shouldn't even have any regular time. It should all be supervised. And the judge basically compromised and gave him like 5% of the time in custody time. And eventually that dwindled down to zero. So at this point in the divorce, Chris has been removed from his home. He has no more money. Now he has no access to his kids. And you said he committed suicide dealing with not being able to access his kids. That's actually not accurate. The suicide came from the last part, which is that they started to jail him repeatedly. And for the most part, this was done using civil contempt of court orders. So it was a variety of different orders. I describe them in the book. The worst one is he spent 10 days in jail based on things he put on Wikipedia. Charles Harrelson has a Wikipedia page. If you go to the page, there's a reference to Pete Thomas Camardo. That's Chris's ex-father-in-law. I think the wording has been changed around, but the meaning has not. What's on that page was initially started by Chris, and he went to jail because he had an order not to repeat allegations about Pete, even though everything on that Wikipedia page is not an allegation. It's all true. So he goes to jail on 4 separate occasions, 3 times civilly, 1 time criminally. And when he's in jail the 3rd time, and this is sometime around early 2012, he's then given a lawyer, and his lawyer relays a message and says, if you leave town, and you have no contact with your ex or her kid or your kids, they'll leave you alone. And Chris was so he'd been at his wit's end that he agreed, and he left and went to Dallas and thought that everything was over. And even though it was horrible to not see his kids, he felt like he was going to start healing, he could start his life again, and he was wrong. The first month after he gets to Dallas, he gets contacted by child support enforcement, and I should mention he had a child support payment of nearly $3,000 a month almost the entire time. And this is at the same time his ex-wife is spending over $1 million to prosecute the divorce. So somehow she has $1 million, and this is all mostly coming from her dad, but somehow she has $1 million to pay a lawyer. At the same time, she's arguing she needs $2,800. It was a little over $2,800 a month for child support. So they reach out for child support, and he was making like $50,000, $60,000 a month. And if you know how child support works and how taxes work, the $2,800 a month he would have paid was all that he would have made after taxes. So initially he asks to lower the child support. When they ignore him, he threatens to go to the media if they don't reduce the child support. The lawyers take that to the DA. It's called a prosecutor, but basically to the DA's office in Fairfax County in Virginia. And the DA's office charges him with attempted extortion. The Dallas authorities, they arrest him using the SWAT team. SWAT stands for Special Weapons and Tactics. So Chris sends an email, and the authorities think the proper response to that email is to send a Special Weapons and Tactics team. He's arrested by the SWAT team, flown on Con Air. If you've ever seen the movie, the real Con Air. So again, he sent an email somebody didn't like. He's flown on Con Air. He spends 3 months in jail awaiting trial. He gets public defenders because he has no more money. And his public defenders argue that since what you're arguing is that his child support, since that's going to the child, you can't say he extorted any money from you because it's supposed to go to the child. And the prosecutor in her closing argument said, use your common sense, and the jury did, and they found him not guilty. But he'd spent another 3 months in jail. This was his 4th jail stint. He has no job, nothing, and the same people, this is Cottrell and his law firm, who demanded he leave town about a year earlier, now are demanding he stay in town. So this is around October of 2013. This is around the time that I first started speaking to him. And I think at that point he had decided that he was going to kill himself, and he did in December of 2013. And the story doesn't end there. The same people who bullied him to death, bullied him in death. He had started a blog. They initially bullied his family to remove the blog. Entries on the blog was a suicide note. That pops back up online, and then they started effectively legally bullying a bunch of websites, including their attempt to legally bully A Voice for Men. When you guys stood up to them rather than cowering and dropping it, the suicide note went viral, and basically the exact opposite effect of what Dina Mackney, her father, and the law firm, and I should mention the lawyer is Rochelle E. Hill. The exact opposite effect of what they wanted to have happen happened, and rather than subverting the suicide note, it's been read by 20 million people. It pops up on Facebook all the time. Every time it pops up on Facebook, you're guaranteed to have 5,000 to 10,000 people read it. His suicide note will be read forever. And basically, what you guys have done and what the internet has done is that it has rendered its legal decision that this is something that you can do. So the story basically ends with him effectively being a martyr. And I have a quote for each chapter, and I don't remember the exact quote, but basically the way the media has treated him has turned him into a martyr. And Dina Mackney, and as well as her father and everybody else involved, they're basically viewed as monsters, and they are. And they drove this guy to suicide, and they drove him to suicide because he discovered their dark secret and other reasons. And no other really good reason to do it. They took him out of his kids' lives, and now the kids are being raised by evil people. There's no other way to describe what these people are like except to call them evil, and that's what they are. And that's not just Dina, her dad. That's the lawyers, that's Saminow, that's the judge's name. There was a main judge, Randy Bellows. There were other judges on the case as well. But the main judge was Bellows. He was the one who set the child support. He was the one who removed his custodial rights. Everyone involved, even Elizabeth Kohut, who's the prosecutor, even her, who knew this bogus attempted extortion charge, everyone involved. They're all evil people. There's no other way to describe them. And that's basically in a nutshell the story.
Man, thanks for telling that. That's very clear, and it brings back a lot of memories of this to me. And I remember thinking at the time when we got served, or not served, but when we were delivered a demand to remove that from the website, thinking, how, I mean, this is his final words. What kind of soulless animal do you have to be to want to silence a guy's last words?
Right. Kind of the same kind of soulless individual who kills his friend and business partner because you're low on cash and you want to collect on the insurance policy. Same kind of soulless individual who removes a father from the children's lives because he discovered the secret. The same kind of soulless individual who keeps driving that person into insanity. It's the same. This is, you asked me when I was on with you last July, and you asked me the question, did they really think they could get away with this, meaning you can send out a bunch of nasty-sounding letters from a lawyer and everybody will cower? And Rich Ware, he was listening. He sent me an email, and he said, of course they thought they could get away with it because they kept overreaching and they kept getting away with everything else. So if you get away with, if you get away with murder, which her dad did, and you get away with removing Chris from the house, bleeding him dry of money, removing his custodial rights entirely, and then throwing him in jail on multiple specious reasons, why wouldn't you think you could get away with it? But yeah, no, look, these are, the clinical definition of a psychopath is somebody with no empathy. These are people who do not care about anyone else. If you get in their way and you get into their agenda, they're going to destroy you. And yeah, no, absolutely. Look, because why did they want to remove the suicide note from the world? Because it told the truth, and Dina Mackney didn't want that out there, because God forbid someone read it and might think, you know what, maybe what you are saying about what happened on divorce isn't accurate. And that's why I said the irony is, rather than subverting it, it's exploded, and now everyone knows. And look, I would have written the book either way, but people wouldn't have cared as much. The book would have been different because there's a whole section on all of this. But yeah, no, absolutely. Very soulless individuals, all of them.
Well, let me ask you this, and I don't think I asked you this before. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about the circumstances that led you to be involved in this as a writer? I mean, you're an investigative journalist. How did you stumble into this and decide this is the story I want to do?
Right. So I had, in September of 2013, I did a story for the website WND.com about top-to-bottom corruption in child protective services, and I was looking for a follow-up. And an activist said, you should look at corrupt custody evaluators in divorces. And I'd never heard of custody evaluators, let alone thought they were corrupt. And a bunch of people, now this is like mid-October, a bunch of people contacted me. Chris contacted me a little later because, ironically enough, he was in jail when the first stream of people had come through. But his corrupt custody evaluator is a guy named Stanton Samonow. And so basically what happened was he contacted me, but by that point I'd heard 100 stories, and his wasn't that remarkable. So I sort of blew him off, and I did keep in contact with him, and I wanted to do a story, but essentially my timeline was not the same as his. And so I had spoken to him several times, and then he killed himself, and I knew that if I didn't do the story, his ex, her dad, their legal team would have painted the situation. I described this in the book as he was mentally ill, he was crazy, he was insane, and he killed himself because he's mentally ill. They never say what the mental illness is, and I knew they would do that, and I knew that would be the documented truth if I didn't straighten it out. So I basically felt a duty because I felt like I let him down in life.
Wow, 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 wow. Listen, let me ask you, do you see any evidence? Now, it's got to be clear at this point, with all the many millions of people that have read this suicide note, that know about this story now, it's got to include people that they're familiar with where they live, that now know what kind of scumbags these people are.
Right.
Is there any evidence of any impact on their lives from this?
You know, it's hard to say. I have been contacted by like friends of friends who say, I found your book, I'm just shocked. This is, one person said, Dina's so nice. And I was like, yeah, I know. A lot of evil people are nice. It's a Jekyll and Hyde thing. But I don't. I'm not sure I can answer that. The one thing I want to say about that is the really interesting thing about the story is there are legal bullies the same way somebody's a bully in the playground. So if you're a bully in the playground and someone stands up to you, you run and cower. So they were legal bullies. You guys stood up to them. Everybody else stood up to them. They've been totally silent. This is Pete Scamardo has 100 lawsuits just in his county. Here's a guy who sues for, you look at him the wrong way, he'll sue you. I remember asking you after the lawyer, I don't know if you guys hired him or he just works with you, but you had a...
let me interrupt to say that would be Mark Randazza.
Right. So after Randazza sent a letter back to Hill, I asked, did you guys get a response back? And you didn't. And during that same time period, a website called Tech Dirt, they reached out to him. They didn't respond. They've been totally silent. And so that's basically the same as in the playground, the bully walks away. So I think the effect in their lives is they've been exposed as the bullies that they are. Here, I'm on your show, I'm on other shows, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of different people are talking about it, and these are people who sue basically for a living. They live in a courtroom, and they're quiet. They never challenge it publicly. I look, privately, they definitely hate me. They probably don't have any use for you, but that's privately. They've never challenged you. They've never challenged me. They've never challenged any part of this story publicly. And look, I describe it in the book. I've sent each of them over 30 emails. In part, so I could say I've sent each of them over 30 emails. So they knew what I was doing. I've written other stories which incorporate parts of this. There's a story coming out in the next couple of days that incorporates it. So I think they've been exposed for bullies for sure. They've been rendered impotent. I can't say that their business has been hurt because I don't know. Certainly they've got to live with the fear that everyone they do business with is going to find out. So at the very least,
Google Dina Mackney, they're going to find out.
Right. So they live with that fear. Dina had a boyfriend. He broke up with her. I can't imagine she'll ever have a boyfriend again. If you go out with Dina, what is it? Buyer beware. I mean, if you go out with that woman with what you know is out there, I don't know what to say.
Yeah. If you go out with that woman and you know what's out there, you deserve what you get coming to you.
Right. So I'd imagine that they've had to have had some impact. But look, the main impact, and this is self-serving, the more people buy the book, the more impact on their lives. I have several different goals with the book, but the main goal is to hold the people who did this to Chris accountable. And the best way to hold him accountable is to sell as many books as possible. I want to see family court reformed, and I hope the book does that, but I think that's more of a pie-in-the-sky dream. I also want the media to take family court more seriously, and that's also more of a pie-in-the-sky dream. But I think that if the book sells enough copies, the people who are responsible for this, that's their legacy. They'll never get away from it. One of the reasons I published and if you've read the original version of the murder chapter, you want to read the final copy because it's completely different. But one of the reasons I published it is because that's what Pete was afraid of. So I wanted the public to know it because that's what all of this is about, covering up a murder, and now he can't cover that murder up. So I think it has affected them. I can't say they make less money. I can't say they've lost friends because I don't know. I know that friends of friends have contacted me, so at least it's definitely getting to 2 degrees of separation, and it'll get to 1 degree of separation soon enough.
James, were you trying to say something? Apparently not.
No, I sure wasn't. I'm listening.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Well, listen, I'm going to dig a little bit more into you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
It would strike me. People have asked me in what I do many times. Man, are you freaking nuts? You're messing with powerful, dangerous people all the time. Might not be good for your health.
Right.
Do you worry about this? Is there something about this that you're attracted to? Do you worry about it? Or are you that much for the underdog that you just want to tell that story? What what motivates you to pick up a case against an affluent, proven murderer,
Right.
Who was capable of doing the most heinous things in the world to Chris Mackney until he killed himself and then tried to rob him of his suicide note?
Right.
You mess with people like
First of all, that's the most asked question. Actually, I just did another story about a guy named Dominic Tomasello who lives in Chicago who's got a similar story, only there's mafia involved, and I had a guy call me and threaten me on a voicemail. So I've been threatened. Number one, the journalists I admire most have done these kinds of stories. So that's number one. One of them is Veronica Guerin, who's an Irish journalist who was killed by Irish gangsters because she got too close to him. I don't worry about it because I don't think he has reach out in Chicago. Legitimately, what I worried about was a defamation suit, which is why one of the reasons why the book took as long as it did was because every word in there I hyper-analyzed. Can I be sued for the way I structured the word? So that I wouldn't say I was worried about it. I was cognizant of it. I don't try to find stories where there are dangerous people. I just happen to find a lot of them. I don't run away from them. And in truth, there's I think about 200 journalists a year killed. About half are in war. I'm not in war. Veronica Guerin is one of those like odd examples. There are a lot of people who do crime reporting and they don't get killed. And you know, her story's been done, so you can see why she was killed. And you know, she I wouldn't say reckless, but she didn't stop even though she knew her life was in danger. But it happens so rarely that if you're going to worry about some dangerous person going after you, but investigative journalists, you're rubbing up against powerful people. Powerful people don't like to have their misdeeds exposed. They're going to retaliate. They won't necessarily kill you. They'll do all kinds of different things. And it just comes with the territory. No, I don't, because I don't see how that helps me. And I don't worry about it in this case because I don't think he's got the kind of reach in Chicago. And look, if I'm killed, there's going to be a list of suspects, and he'll be at the top of the list. So
yeah, and I was going to say that too. Is that it would not seem to me to be the wisest move on his
right.
That kind of act.
I think what they want is to hope that very few people buy the book, and just be quiet and let it all blow over. And that's another look. It's self-serving. That's another reason why I need to buy the book, so that they don't get away with that. Few enough people buy the book actually get away with it, though it's in a lot of different places. But yeah, I think their main agenda is to just keep quiet, which again is bully behavior. They've been called out, and bullies, when you're called out, this is what you do. I don't think he'll lash out. And look, I don't know how this is going to come off. If he lashes out and I get killed, I'm prepared to be a martyr. So, but I won't stop, and I won't change the kinds of stories I do. I don't seek out these stories, but I have found them more often than not.
Well, I think it comes off depending on the listener. I've said more than once that I'm willing to die for what I do. Mm-hmm. And I don't say that to sound like a martyr. Mm-hmm. But I say that to let the people that want to silence me that if you want me silent, you're going to have me dead.
Right.
I'm not going to quit talking about these issues. Nothing can make me. And who knows? Maybe if they kill me, it'll inspire somebody else to stand up.
Right. And that's what they would have to do to me. My favorite journalist who's living is Cheryl Atkinson. The sort of powerful people she takes on wouldn't kill you, but she's demonized by everyone all the time, and it's not comfortable to have a slew of people calling you names. So and it doesn't stop her. And so look, if I didn't want this, I could be a theater reporter and go to cool plays or be a restaurant reporter, and then you're fine. And look, that's a very cushy living. You get to go to cool plays or eat at fabulous restaurants if that's what I want, or be a sports reporter. Just make sure you stay out of the way of the athletes coming off the sidelines, and you're fine. But
you get hurt doing sports coverage.
Right, I've done sports. Look, so there's nothing wrong with any of that, but Investigative reporters, since they've been created, have rubbed up against powerful people. Powerful people don't like that. They respond in kind. Different kind of responses. You know, they'll sue you. They'll demonize you. They'll try to take away your ability to make money. If they're violent, they'll try to kill you. That's the people Veronica Guerin rubbed up against. That's the kind of people they were. The kind of people Cheryl Atkinson rubs up against. They will demonize you and try to marginalize you or bully you in other ways. And if that's not something you can deal with, you just have to find a different profession. And no, it's not for everyone. But you know, when the guy left me a voicemail threatening me, I just thought he was a loser. Like, why would you leave a journal? You know, and I put it in the article. So you know, I figured it was a mafioso wannabe, because a real mafioso would never leave a message like that on a voicemail, because he's smart enough to know that a journalist would just take that voicemail and put it in the article. So I don't know if my life's really threatened. I don't know if I've rubbed up against enough bad people like that. So I don't worry about it. I won't stop the kind of reporting I'm doing. I certainly won't do that. And look, I do like standing up for the underdog. So I do like bringing a voice to the voiceless, and that's what I want to do. And if I rub up against powerful people, so be it.
Listen, I'm going to interject this now, and I'm going to say it again before we close tonight. Folks, you're listening to this, whether you're listening to it live or you're listening to it tomorrow or a week from now or a month from now, you'll see in the description to the program that right square in the middle of it, I have inserted a link to Michael Volpe's book on this story. You can't finish reading the description without your eyes going over that link. Please go there and buy it. Those of you who visit this channel and who come to see this programming, do so because something drove you here, in most cases. I mean, there's feminists that come in here, there's trolls that come in here, but most of the people that visit these videos and listen to them or watch them, it is because they've had circumstances in their life of injustice, and they were the ones that were lucky enough not to kill themselves and have come out of it. You've got people fighting for you and other men like you. One such man right now is Michael Volpe, and he's the guy getting threats. He's the guy digging into the past of mobster-like killers, and who are telling the story that Chris Mackney wanted told. Chris Mackney set up a blog. He left a lengthy suicide note. He wanted people to know this story. And this is the guy that stepped up and did it. Go in there and buy his book. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go in there and buy a copy right now. I already got a promotional copy a long time ago. I'm going to go in there right now this minute as we're talking and buy a copy. So please, go in there and buy this guy's book. This is a heartbreaking, fascinating story that will really let you know the depths of corruption in our family court system. And I'm not saying the particular court that Chris Mackney was at, it includes that, but I'm talking about the entire system. What money can buy you, what influence can buy you, how your life can be destroyed, how your rights can be taken away on a whim, on a lark by somebody, just because. They couldn't even leave this poor guy alone when he went to Dallas. Couldn't leave him alone just to live his life and honor their deal. They had to go after him more. They had to drive him into the grave. This goes on in American life in more places than the family court that abused Chris Mackney to death. It goes on in a lot of places, and we need to get this story out there. It's hard enough to even get this story told, and if we're not going to be a part of telling it ourselves, man, I tell you what, that's a pretty hopeless feeling. So please go in there and buy this book and give this guy, that's something for his tip jar. Believe me, the literally several dollars he'll make off of each copy is not going to go so far. And then when you're done, give him a review.
Right. Can I just add? Well, first of all, Chris didn't start the blog because he wanted his story told. He never wanted his story told. He was a private person. He started the blog because he didn't know any other way to get the truth out, and so that's That's number one. Number two, there's a couple of numbers I want people to keep in mind. If the book sells 10,000 copies, roughly 10,000 copies, you can bet Chris will have a Wikipedia page. If it sells 100,000 copies, everyone involved will have a Wikipedia page. And the reason that's important, that's their legacy. So if this book sells a ton of books, then Pete Scamardo will have his own Wikipedia page. His daughter will have her own Wikipedia page. Samuel already has one. The lawyers, the judge, all of these people, and the main thing in all of these Wikipedia pages will be their role in his death. And so that's basically what you're looking at. If you support the book enough, that's their legacy. The other thing is, victims always tell me, why don't more people tell our stories? Well, I have. If this doesn't turn into a great commercial exercise, then that's a reason for other people not to tell their stories. You've got a whole book about this, so hopefully you support it. Because from what I hear from victims, there need to be a lot more people like me. So, you got a book out there about family law and all of the corruption there. So hopefully people do go buy it.
I hope they do too. So tell me, do you have another project that you're on?
I'm actually right now I'm working with my friend on a children's book, but I've had dozens of people come to me with they want me to do a follow-up on another family court story. There's a story I told in the book that it's a guy named Neil Shelton. He's got a really interesting story, and I told it a little bit. That guy Dominic Tomasello, because there's mobsters involved, I might turn that into a book. I've got an idea for a fiction book as well, but right now, over the next 2-3 months, I'm going to finish up this children's book, and then we'll see. I also wanted to mention, no one needs to hold their breath, but I'm working on about a 5,000, and it will be published. It'll take a few months, but it's going to be on the intersection between feminist nonprofits like the Nows and Planned Parenthood and a bunch of the smaller feminist nonprofits and the domestic violence industry. And so I'm working on that now, but I target maybe February before it gets published. That's going to be published in a place called the Capital Research Center. I've done several articles there. There's one on the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts that's on family law. And so this profile I'm working on is the sort of thing you guys have been talking about. So again, you shouldn't hold your breath because it's going to be a while before it gets published. But this is exactly the kind of stuff you guys have been talking about, and I want to expose that intersection between feminists and the creation of this domestic violence industry.
That is, wow, what a fascinating project. Now, is there any questions you're going to allow me to ask you about it?
No, well, you can, but I'm just starting, so it's all, I'm looking at cases. I don't have any specific cases, but please, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is, I wanted to know what made you think of that particular subject.
Right. Well, number one, those profiles are a little longer and I get paid more, so I was looking for something. And the Capital Research Center, they're like a watchdog group over left-wing nonprofits. So I was trying to figure out how do I use all of the knowledge I have about family law and also get something that interests them. And I did a lot of work on and it's going to basically dovetail off of this silver bullet technique. And in fact, one of the guys, a guy named Ronald Pierce, who I have his story a little bit in the book, he'll probably be in the profile. I just knew from studying it between VAWA and all of these domestic violence shelters, I understood how the industry worked. And I knew that if I told them that let's do the feminist nonprofits and Planned Parenthood, people don't know it, but they do some work. I don't know if it's a lot, but they definitely do some work on it. For these guys, that's very interesting. If an opportunity to expose a Now and a Planned Parenthood is interesting to them, and I've talked to, and it's not all men, but it's the predominantly men who get victimized by this, and I've talked to so many of them, and this is a topic nobody wants to talk about because if you challenge the domestic violence industry, well then what they do is, and this is again rubbing up against powerful forces, then you're for violence against women. And of course I'm not for violence against women. What I'm against is dumb, counterproductive laws and the flow of grant money that they say is for one thing when it's really for something else. And I'm also against corruption. And so I just saw it as an opportunity for something I could do for these guys. I get paid pretty well. And, you know, we'll see. If it comes out right, it could be really revolutionary. And Planned Parenthood with the videos is in the news, and this is an opportunity to attach Planned Parenthood to it. And also, I've talked to a bunch of men who, in a very similar manner, were victimized by the silver bullet technique. I think it's very important that people know that this happens, and it happens in a large number. And, you know, I talk to feminists all the time. I do a lot of stories that they like, and they just refuse to acknowledge that women lie about being abused. And, you know, lying is not a gender-specific issue. You know, men and women lie in about the same number, because it's not like if you're a woman you lie less. So it just depends on what kind of a person you are. And if you have the opportunity and you have the wrong kind of moral fortitude, you're going to lie. And so that's why I wanted to do it. It was an opportunity to do another one of these big projects with, and I have a lot of information on it.
When you're talking about the intersection between the domestic violence industry and feminism, are you talking about an academic connection or a political connection?
No. So basically, these and this is feminist nonprofits now. So not the feminist movement, because the Capital Research Center specifically looks at nonprofits. So basically, what the Nows of the world, and I don't want to specify just now, though they were certainly involved, but they pushed VAWA and then benefited from VAWA by either getting grant money directly to fund domestic violence shelters, which would help women navigate the process, or by having groups which were allied with them receive funding. So basically, what these feminist nonprofits did is they pushed a law that they were going to financially benefit from, and the after effect is that it's very easy to get a restraining order, that these restraining orders are completely unconstitutional, and they're used in divorce and custody cases for leverage routinely. And again, look, the silver bullet technique, it's not a term because it happens like 4 times a year. It's a term because it happens a lot. You know, the first time I heard that term was in an episode of Law and Order SVU, and it was Elliot Stabler's describing what's happened, or no, somebody else was describing it, and Stabler, the character, says the silver bullet technique, and I had to rewind it, and I was like, that's what they did to Chris. That's called the silver bullet technique. So it doesn't have a term because it happens rarely. It has a term because it happens enough that you have to put a term on it. So that's what I'm looking at, is the intersection of how this law was created and the beneficiaries of the law, and how there's a complete conflict of interest by the people pushing the law because they financially benefit from the law. So now has a financial interest in perpetuating the idea that men are dangerous and we need a lot of these domestic violence shelters, because now it gets money from the domestic violence shelters. So I don't think people understand. I don't think people in general, they understand almost none of this. And again, and I'm sure people will attack me as I want to see women beaten up. I don't want to see women beaten up. My personal opinion is the government cannot solve these kinds of social problems. If you're a wife beater, you're a wife beater. I don't believe a government program is going to stop you from being a wife beater. So that's really, my problem is severalfold, but my problem specifically with the domestic violence industry is the same people pushing it are benefiting from it financially, and I don't think people understand that. And look, if there's that kind of conflict of interest in any other field, every journalist on the planet will want to expose it, but because it's in this specific realm, people get afraid. But if you go and read that, the profile of the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, that organization, Capital Research Center, went way out on a limb, and it was one of their most well-read and most well-received profiles, and they went way out on a limb. My editor was like, well, we might get sued for this, and for this, and they still published it, even though I was putting them way out on a limb. And it's basically the same thing, but in this case, because they want to expose now in Planned Parenthood, I think they've agreed to it. So it's something they want to see.
Well, that's refreshing to hear, because I'm going to tell you my experience with publishers and particularly with news journalism and other areas is that they could care less. I guess I want to get your take on this. I think it was 4 years ago we ran the Agent Orange files. How long ago was it, James, that we ran the Agent Orange files?
2012. Actually, it was December of 2011 that they came out.
Okay, so close to 4 years ago. And in this, we had a relatively well-known novelist from Simon & Schuster. We had people who were community coordinators. We had school teachers. All of them identified as being involved in some of the most hateful stuff you can possibly imagine. I mean, really, openly expressing fantasies about throwing children out of windows, locking men in buildings and burning them. And these were people all the way up to somebody that was connected to the UN. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we had a torrent of traffic over that. I mean, it was absolutely astounding. And not one person in the mainstream media picked it up.
Right.
What is going, just from your experience, you're a journalist, what's going on with that?
All right, so you want me to speak about family court now?
Yeah, you can speak about family court, but
so there are several with family court. I have a whole chapter on the media and why family court isn't covered. There are so many competing issues, and the main one, in my opinion, is this: whether you believe you're liberal, you believe you're conservative, or you believe you're objective, you still mostly cover stories that have a liberal versus conservative angle. So if there's illegal immigration involved, you'll cover that story. Police brutality, now we've, the conservatives love the police, the liberals hate the police. So if there's police brutality involved, you'll cover that. Healthcare, the economy, the foreign policy. Family court doesn't have that. There is no conservative position on family court. There is no liberal position on family court. As a result, the media doesn't care, because whether you're liberal, conservative, or objective, you don't see an angle because you don't think anyone cares. Now, the public cares, just the media doesn't care. So that's the first problem. The second problem is the media, that is, considers it he said, she said. Now, if you'll read my book, you'll see it's not he said, she said. There's nothing in there that's he said, she said. It's all documented. But if you remember Andre Agassi, perception is reality. If you perceive it, and I have a great quote from a Washington Post court reporter saying it. So they perceive it as he said, she said. The other thing is they perceive it, unless there's a celebrity involved, as a private matter. So it's ironic. If you're a celebrity, then your divorce isn't private. But if you're not a celebrity, then we just think it's a private matter. And then the other thing is, they'll never admit this. A few have admitted this to me. It's ripe for defamation lawsuits. It's just ripe. You get anything wrong and boom, you got a defamation suit. The other thing is, victims of family court abuse have a form of PTSD called legal abuse syndrome, and I describe it in the book. They're very difficult to deal with, extremely difficult to deal with. If you don't know they have PTSD and you're dealing with them and they flare up and they manifest their PTSD, you're just going to think they're nuts, and they're not nuts. They've been traumatized. And the last thing is, and I describe a book by Cheryl Atkinson, the last thing is it's original reporting, it's investigative reporting, which no matter what you do, they don't like. So you have all of these competing issues, and the mainstream media doesn't want to get involved. But I will tell you, the main thing is, if you see a story and you wonder why isn't the mainstream media covering it, ask yourself, is there a liberal position on this story? Is there a conservative position on this story? And if the answer in your mind is no, that's probably the main reason. Whether the media doesn't even I don't think they even realize it, but they cover a left versus right story. The angle depends on what kind of a journalist it is, but it has to have a left versus right angle. And if it doesn't have it, they don't really care. And that's really the main reason. And all of these other things make it even more difficult.
Sounds like some sage words. Listen, do you know of any sources of information where I can go or anybody that chooses to can go and learn more about legal abuse syndrome?
Yes. Okay. So Dr. Karen Huffer she's a psychologist. She coined the term. Her last name I think is Huffer. Her first name I think is Karin. She has several books that you can buy. She has a website. She has a whole bunch of stuff. She's the leading authority. If you Google it, there's a ton of stuff about it. People who have been victimized by it have told their stories. But I think, look, if you're going to go to the source, Dr. Karen Huffer is the woman who coined the term. She's done the most work on it. Her books are everywhere. If you go to Amazon or whatever's your favorite bookseller, or if you want to buy it through brick and mortar, Dr. Karen Huffer, her books are available everywhere. That's the best source, but it's in a lot of different places. She's been talking about it for more than 20 years. And look, it's a very debilitating form of PTSD, and it's, I think, even more debilitating than like the traditional form of PTSD when you come back from war. And the reason being is the traditional form of PTSD, one of the symptoms is avoidance, which means you try to do everything you can not to think about the trauma. It's one of the reasons why people who come back from war develop drug and alcohol problems, because it's a form of self-medication to stop you from thinking about the trauma of war. With legal abuse syndrome, one of the symptoms is obsession, so it's the exact opposite. Rather than avoiding your trauma, all you can do is think about your trauma. So think about the most painful moment in your life and imagine if that played in your mind in a loop. And that's basically what Chris Mackney was feeling. That's what everyone with legal abuse syndrome was feeling. And that's really why he killed himself, because his mind was filled with nothing but trauma. He was obsessed, consumed with the trauma. And everyone with legal abuse syndrome is. And the reason that is because even if your legal process has ended, the legal abuse hasn't ended because the legal process has stripped you of everything. So if the divorce has taken away your house, your job, your access to your children, even if you're not going to court, you have no house, job, or access to your children. So all you can think about is the fact that you have no house, job, or access to your children. And again, that's the consuming with the obsession. It's debilitating, and I believe almost every suicide related to family court, that person had LAS.
I wouldn't doubt that at all. I can tell you for a fact that in the numerous pleas for help that I get, by the time guys are just beaten to death by the system, I see the same sort of symptoms that you're talking about. And one of the worst things about the obsession is that it renders them still, even though they're obsessed with what's happened, it leaves them unable to focus on working on solutions.
It leaves them unable to focus on anything else. There's an anecdote I tell. Chris was at a dinner party, and a friend of his sent him a text message basically updating them on Chris on their case. And Chris leaves the party and it's like, there's so many important things in the world and I can't believe what they're talking about. Basically, he couldn't be at the dinner party. So he was so consumed with what was happening to him, he couldn't have 2 hours where he would just enjoy life. And that's what happens to everyone with legal abuse syndrome, because it's like until this is fixed, my life can't move forward. And the problem is it usually doesn't get fixed. Yeah, and it's very debilitating, extremely debilitating.
Let me ask you this. Do you think there was a point in Chris Mackney's sad story that if he had just done anything different, that he would still be alive?
Probably. His friends, one of his friends, Rich Ware, told me that as soon as Chris started representing himself, he said, you need to get out of here. You need to go to Mexico if you have to. You need to go to another country with no extradition treaty. You need to get as far away from these people as possible. And another friend of his, Terry Hinderman, told him something similar. There were friends who told him you just have to call no mas, and he refused to do that. And at the point where he may have realized that he should have done that, it was too late. But yeah, you know, it's ironic, interesting, and it speaks to our family court system. And they were right. He'd probably still be alive, but that the answer at that moment was to sneak into another country and start over in the other country, and then that's what you need to do. But yeah, I think if he had done something drastic like that at the moment he ran out of money, he'd still be alive. But yeah, I mean, it would have required him, going to Mexico, going to Sweden, going to some country that he couldn't, that the Scamardos couldn't reach him at. But yeah, I think he would have been alive if he had done that. But Terry Hinderman told me that he felt that Chris was too competitive, that he didn't want to withdraw. But yeah, something like that. That was sound advice. Rich probably knows the story better than even me, and that was sound advice, and he was right, and he should have done that. But it's hindsight's 20/20. But if he had done something like that, he might still be alive.
Wow. Okay, well, we're just about out of time here. Is there anything that you want to add to this? I'm going to make another pitch myself for your book. Again, folks, link in the low bar. You want to read?
I want to mention it. The full title is Bullied to Death, Chris Mackney's Kafkaesque Divorce. Kafkaesque name from Franz Kafka, a Czech writer. It's available at all online booksellers. If you're trying to get it at brick and mortar, it's not available in too many there yet, but from Amazon to Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, you name it. Barnes & Noble, the online version, and Amazon, they generally have the best prices. And so if you're trying to get the best deal, you want to look at both of them, and depending on the day, and if you have some sort of a coupon with one or the other, you might want to get it at one of those two. I've generally not found the prices at any of the other ones as good as the first two. And yeah, look, if you feel this was wrong, and that you want a sense of justice, again, it's self-serving, but the best way you can do that is to drop it's $8, $7.99 for the electronic version. Is the best way is to drop the few dollars for the electronic version and tell other people to buy the book as well.
And I have already, in the process of this program, I've ordered the soft cover of it. Maybe one of these days, if I ever get to meet you, I'll get you to sign it.
Absolutely, yeah. I've started watching Pawn Stars, so I'm trying to sign books just in case someday my book becomes the signed copy becomes like a collector's item.
Yep, you heard that, folks. If you ever see a 6'5" ancient-looking Texas limping into Rick's shop with a copy of that book, it's
yeah. See if Rick would make it into he could create the market for it. But yeah, no, I would be glad to sign it.
Okay, wonderful. Look, it's been great having you. For anything else, thanks for doing the work on this. I know this is grueling stuff. I've been involved in several different advocacy cases, and I can imagine it's very similar because it involves digging and digging and digging like we've done. And some of the stuff you have to look at is just plain ugly. It's like being.
It was mentally draining. Let me leave you with this. I think the best part of it was talking to the victims, many of whom I found to be very courageous, for dealing with this and staying strong. And a lot of them are suicidal, and telling their story and being honest about their mistakes and being honest about very personal parts of their lives, and that was the best part of it for me. It was men and women, but people victimized who were willing to share with me. That was the best part of doing this book.
Excellent. Okay, well, again, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully we can get you back at some point in the future and do an update on this, let people know how the book is sold and how well it's doing, and whether or not it's been able to play a role in maybe delivering a little bit of karma to the right people, because God knows they deserve it. Thanks for being here. And James, after they buy Michael Volpe's book, what are people supposed to do?
Take the red pill.